This is not a test. This is episode 99 of Game of Crimes. Hello, everybody, players, playerettes, dudettes, amigas, amigos, everybody in between. This is a momentous one because the next one, what's 99 plus 1, Murph?
It's not 199. 100?
100. We are coming up on episode 100.
That's hard to believe, isn't it?
Dude, I'm telling you.
Wow. Well, I'm just, that's a testament to our listeners that you guys are still supporting us after almost 2 years here.
Yeah, and I think they've worked with us, they've suffered with us, they've gone through the same stuff we have, and those folks that are still out there listening to us, and to you new listeners, we want to thank you. So obviously, you guys know who I am, Morgan Wright, literally here with my partner in crime.
It's Murph. And I got to tell you, for those of you that suffered through my wife giving me down the road for 2 hours, God bless you. Thank you. He's a peach.
Well, hey, guys, just some quick housekeeping before we get started. Hey, head on over to Apple, Spotify, those 5 stars. They help us out a lot. Just hit the 5, leave a comment, tell us what you think. If you want to see an episode, if you got some suggestions, leave them there. We really appreciate all the feedback we get from everybody. Also, head on over to our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com. We've got a ton of books. We have a ton of books on there. We had 2 of them that we put from Jared Kobach last week when we did the Zodiac Killer. So that was an interesting episode, but we put his 2 books on that. And then, like I said, we've got a lot of good stuff. So head on over there. Also follow us on that thing they call social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. But dude, Murph, you got to be on Patreon. I know you got to be. Well, you are on Patreon because we record our episodes and put them there.
That's, what? We do some stuff on. I love doing what we're doing, especially when we bring the guests on, because we bring some fantastic people in here. But doing on Patreon, we get a little bit more into our personal opinions. You guys, our listeners on Patreon, you feed a lot into what we bring on there. Our case of the month, the Q&A, especially the Q&A. We haven't turned down a single question yet. And I think the last one we did was over an hour and a half, right?
Yeah, well, we had to break. It would have been 2 hours had we answered all of Alex's questions. Alex is still got the title for asking the most questions, which he's proud of, but we get to it in part 2. So, hey, but we answer all questions.
He's a very inquisitive young man. We love it.
Yes. No, and look, guys, too, we just, because of Steve, not Siegel, we did a review of the Boston Marathon bombing, the Netflix documentary that was there because we had Ed Davis on. So we went through that, went into some more depth on that. So that was all good stuff. And guys, we got a lot of good stuff coming out. 911, what's your emergency? You can't make this shit up. The Narcometer, we review movies for accuracy, authenticity, and believability. And by the way, somebody posted, I'm going to have them banned. Somebody posted a clip of Bruce Willis saying, Die Hard is not a Christmas movie. That is false. That is a deep fake video. It is. And that's one of the movies we reviewed. I just want to be upfront with you.
He's suffering from some, I don't know if it's dementia or Alzheimer's or what. He kind of forgot. Let's just give him a break on this one.
Yeah, but it is greatest Christmas movie of all time. So we'll do that, guys. So, hey, look, you got to be on over there. So how do you find us? Patreon.com/Game of Crimes. That's Patreon.com/Game of Crimes. One more time, if you're listening on the road, that's Patreon.com/Game of Crimes. And by the way, Murph, that is, there's psychology behind that. When you hear ads on the radio, they always repeat the number 3 times.
Yeah, I know it's aggravating as hell, and we're doing the same thing.
But we're not on the radio. This is a podcast. Aha. There you go. It's different. All right, guys. Hey, and before we get started too, make sure you head on over and visit our Game of Crimes fan page run by our favorite mafia queen, Sandy Salvato, who runs it, not with an iron fist, with a velvet fist, I would say.
But still a fist no matter what.
Yeah. And guys, just head on over there. Just go into Facebook, type Game of Crimes fans. It'll pop up. Ask a couple simple questions. Just get close, get in the ballpark, and then you'll be admitted. You'll be deemed worthy of admittance to the inner sanctum. You'll go through a ritual. We have to haze you. And then there's a secret agreement you have to sign. But beyond that, it's all good fun.
Yeah, and when you get that mortgage check each month, the mortgage bill from Morgan and I, just go ahead and pay your part of it.
Just do it. It's all fun and games till somebody loses an eye, right?
There you go.
So speaking of losing an eye, this is a show about crime. We talk about bad people doing bad things and bad people doing bad things to good people. We take the story seriously, but
if you haven't figured it out yet, we never take ourselves serious. We're going to have some fun on here.
And what's one of the ways we have fun?
Well, we have this thing we call
Small Town Police Blotter. And thanks to Tracy Jacobs. I stole this from her.
Good.
Off the Game of Tribes fan page. Way to go, Tracy. We blame you for this one if it doesn't work. But Murph, this you haven't read the Facebook page, have you?
I have not.
Okay, good. This comes from LaPorte County, Indiana.
Okay.
Now, LaPorte County has actually got some neat technology. Everybody arrested has to have a body scan before being released into the jail. The scanning device, it produces images, like if you're concealing stuff. It's like what Customs and Border Patrol and other folks would do.
This is already sounding bad.
Oh, what do you think they found?
Hey, after that one we had on not long ago, a tractor trailer, I don't know.
No. Well, so the body scanner was purchased in 2017 for about $100,000 in response to drugs finding their way into the jail. And one of the ways they found them, people would secrete them in their oral or, their anal cavity and maybe some other ones, right? Or swallow them. And so it's been proven time and time again to prevent foreign material from making their way into the jail and ultimately ensuring the safety and security of all, but not just the inmates, but also the staff. That's what the sheriff said. So they did a body scan. A object was detected, Murph.
Ooh.
And confirmed during a second scan. It was a pair of scissors.
Ooh.
8 inches long.
Oh. And up where?
Up the rectum.
Oh, my God.
No, rectum damn near killed him with 8 inches of scissors up there.
Holy cow. We've heard about prisoners in prison hiding shanks up their butts and things like that. I'm thinking, how do you do that and not hurt yourself?
But scissors.
I guess they wanted to cut their own hair while they were in jail.
Here's my point. You're about to be arrested. Do you run into the bathroom and shove a pair of scissors there? Are you walking around with them the whole time? We've got to investigate this and find out, because the sheriff said, Allen said the motive for concealing the scissors in that manner remains under investigation. The name of the offender was not released.
Wow. It just boggles your mind. I mean, how could you even sit down without stabbing yourself? Think about it.
Ouch. Well, hey, I decided to pick on Indiana, Murph, so I got another one for you.
Okay.
Kokomo, Indiana.
Kokomo.
A man walked into a village pantry with the intent to rob. He wanted the clerk to put cigarettes and money into a bag. When the clerk obeyed the man crammed the gun back into the waist of his pocket, and the gun discharged.
Shot himself.
Whoa, but it got his left leg and his right testicle.
Oh, no.
Ow.
Oh, God.
Speaking of ouch.
Oh, that's worse than the scissors.
Oh, that one hurts. Oh, and Murph, finally, Ohio County, Indiana. Ohio County, Indiana. Again, our third story from Indiana. A man is facing multiple felony charges after he was caught trying to steal. Ohio County is population 5,940. Salute.
The whole county's only that? Wow.
Yeah, deputies say surveillance video shows Jack Steele Jr., 38, breaking into the building around 6:40 a.m. He rummaged around the office for 9 minutes, stealing a jump pack starter for vehicle batteries, a digital camera, a flashlight, and several other items. Guess what, Murph?
What?
He had been brought into another area of the sheriff's office building after a DUI investigation, and he was told to wait in the foyer for a ride. Instead, what did he do? While he's in the frickin' sheriff's office, he breaks into the sheriff's office and steals this shit. I mean, this man, he shouldn't be arrested. He should be taken to a mental institution and confined.
Oh, my gosh. You know what? We got to get a hold of Todd McComas from up there. Former Indiana State Trooper.
That's right.
Guest on episode 81. What the hell, Tom? What's going on up there?
Well, and they got the video camera when the ride arrived. Steele was trying to wipe his fingerprints off the counters before leaving. According to the sheriff, this has to rank up there as one of the world's dumbest criminals. If anybody from the show World's Dumbest is watching and needs a video for the criminals, I'd be more than happy to provide them one now. The search warrants led deputies to Steele's home, and of all of the missing items were recovered. All of them were. However, deputies are still looking for him. If you know Steele, tell him to make it easy on himself and report to the Ohio County Sheriff's Office to turn himself in. And the news release ends with, he knows where we're located.
That's what you got to love about sheriffs. They're elected officials. They say what's on their mind.
As we found out with Mike Chapman.
Absolutely. Love the guy. I mean, just fantastic job. He's up for re-election again. certainly would love to vote for him if I still.
Well, I'm in Loudoun County. I can tell you, I've seen the Democratic challenger and stuff. And again, we're not folks. We actually had somebody said we wish we had a guy say on the Facebook page about being more political, maybe doing a separate podcast. We try and keep it here, but I can just tell you, regardless of how you vote, it's going to be very difficult to displace an incumbent sheriff who's got the record he's got with the crime rate where it's at and the services that are provided. I mean, usually you do change when there's a problem.
This guy is recognized for all the kinds of. He just was elected by the National Sheriff's Association as Sheriff of the Year for the whole country. Mike's a good man. He's a good man.
Gonna be tough. Well, speaking of a good man, you brought us another good man, Murph.
Mm-hmm.
Another good man by the name of Alex Dominguez. And I'll tell you what, the dude's a crack up.
Alex is one of the funniest people I ever met in my life. I'm not kidding you. We were agents together, and you'll hear his story. He's Cuban American. Very big man, physically, just has a personality that I don't know that he intends to be funny. He just is. We were both special agents, assistant special agents charged in Special Operations Division. And when Derek Maltz was our boss, we'd go in and he'd bring, I think we had like 15 ASACs at the time from all the different agencies. And by the time you left there, one of these meetings, he had Derek so flustered, he shut up, believe it or not. And we all had tears running down our cheeks from laughing so hard. Alex is he's hilarious. He's had a fantastic career. He's very conscientious. He's extremely intelligent. I really think you guys are going to like this episode.
Well, and I'll tell you what we had to do too. In the second part of the episode, part 2, you're going to hear some areas when we start getting into talking about the operation down at the Dominican Republic. After we recorded this, Alex came back and said, hey, actually, one of the guys I talked about is now actually a senior government official. And so he was very sensitive about releasing the man's name. So you're going to hear kind of a couple hiccups, there where I had to cut. It was difficult because when you got conversations, it's hard to cut out just a name. And rather than doing a bleep, which would have just, I think, be annoying, so-and-so beep, I just, I did some creative editing, but so apologies for the kind of the hiccupy part towards the last end of part 2, but you'll get the story though. But Murph, there's only one way they're going to hear the hiccups and attempt to figure out who we're talking about. And that's got to ask you, I have to ask you one question. Are you ready to play the biggest, baddest, most dangerous and testicle-friendly, scissor-friendly game of all?
Yes, sir, brother. So everybody get in, sit down, shut up, and hold on. You might want to get a tissue because you might have a few tears running down your cheeks here from laughing so hard. Let's hear from Mr. Alex Dominguez.
So when I say hello to my little friend, that's going to have some meaning in this episode because we got a guy this guy could have been Scarface, but instead he chose DEA. So we're going to get into this a little bit. So Alex Dominguez, a Cuban American, fled from Cuba. Welcome to Game of Crimes, amigo.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, guys. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
That's how somebody from Kansas speaks Spanish.
Is that how it is?
Mi español es perfecto, amigo. Es perfecto.
It's on par with Al Pacino. I the first time I heard him, that's pretty bad. But then it grew on me. It really grew on me. I don't know why, but it was bad when he started, and I thought this ain't going to work. But damn, if he didn't hit it out of the park.
And you thought my hillbilly Spanish was bad just because I say "Hola, y'all."
I was just in Miami for a conference speaking at it, and the guy who was our moderator was a Cuban American.
Sure.
And it was so funny because we're joking around, and he sounded like he looks at me, goes, "Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me?" It's like, I'm talking to you. That's right.
Senor.
Oh, God.
Well, Alex, we were having fun in the pre-call. You got a lot of stories. I finally had to stop it because it's like, no, save this for the podcast. We got good stuff. No. So part of the interesting part, as I was saying, it reminds us of an episode we had with Jack Garcia, FBI.
Right, yeah.
You know him. He came from Cuba. Sure. So let's talk about you. How the hell... First of all, let's talk about your story. Then we'll talk about how you got into Cosa Nostra, thing of ours. But
sure.
Tell us about growing up. Were you in Cuba as a young boy?
I actually was born in 1960, so I was there for roughly barely a year. Did a little wayward stop. Getting out was tough for my dad. We were in Spain for a couple of years, and then many Cubans had to make a required stop in Union City, New Jersey, back in the if you go to Union City, New Jersey, back in the '60s, there were some of the original Cuban Americans, and there was it was a story in my family actually. I probably believe it was that my mother said to my dad, "You've got 4 months. If you don't move us from here, I am leaving you here, and I'm taking the kids." Because back then, Union City was not, exactly.
Well, so how old were you when you left Cuba?
I was barely a year old, and then we ended up resettling, sort of in Miami. Like I say, Mecca for wayward Cubans. When I was about 4, I'm 4 years old.
So go back in your family history when you're talking to your dad and mom. Why did they leave Cuba? What was going on at the time that number one allowed them to get out?
Yeah, it was it was that whole, essentially, the way from the readings and of course the speaking of family members, it was about a 2-year period where when the Castro Revolution sort of takes ground, and there were still a fair amount of people that believed, hey, this is not going to be that bad. The previous guy was a guy called Fulgencio Batista, which was not really very well liked. And this whole experiment, and then it started to go downhill as far as the Castro regime. You'll hear that a lot from Cuban Americans, and it was just a communism in a way that was developing itself. But specifically, my grandfather, who was still there relatively young, for all intents and purposes, he was in his, I don't think he was 50 yet. He was in the military. So they had basically put out an order that we luckily found out through a family member, that they were going to give him the wall, is what it was called. You'll hear this from Cubans. It's called paredon, which means the wall. And basically it's that they'll have a trial, in the morning, and the, sentence is carried out in the afternoon, and people were being in towns summarily lined up. And my grandfather didn't want to leave. A couple of people were saying, we have some documents, you've got to get out because they're going to kill you. And he says, I haven't done anything wrong. I've not done anything wrong. Still believe in that. So that sort of was the genesis of the need to leave, that people were being just sort of arbitrarily being picked out by neighbors, and even sadly in some cases family members, for being a sympathizer of the previous regime. So that's what sort of led that initial outflow of and like my parents, I still remember, and like I said, I we're going to keep this fun. I still sometimes struggle with it. My dad rolled up what was a fortune at the time, was about $30 rolled up in a cigarette pack. They were rolled up as cigarettes, and he had them in his coat pocket. That was because when you left, they basically said, you're not taking anything except that shirt on your back. Anything you had in your hand was summarily taken. So including pets, if you had a little pet, so it was a rough time.
No, that's it for me. They take my pets. Yeah. It's on.
Well, it's funny. This was one of those specific stories that when my mother had to leave, she had me in one arm and had this little family dog in the other, and I forget what. It was a blanket for me. She had me, that I was 1 year old, with a blanket and the dog in the other arm, or something along those lines, and that the outgoing official said, you have to pick. It's either the blanket or the dog. And she says, you know what?
30 minutes to decide.
And she said, here, take the blanket. My son doesn't need the blanket. He thought he'd give her the dog, figuring the boy. But again, look, you've probably spoken to other people that have emigrated under circumstances from other countries. It's not always pretty, but
very few
that was it.
You're only the second person we've talked that's come from Cuba, and that's okay. Now, did you lose any family?
Yes. We had one uncle that was imprisoned, and he ended up eventually getting out. We didn't lose him. I would say we probably lost him because he was never the same. He was in a prison there for about 7-8 years, and he ends up living in Spain. He just never got it together. So yeah, it was the psychological torture, as with this was as bad. And then being a young guy in Miami, I had some relatives and friends. I didn't realize it at the time. They became part of that Bay of Pigs invasion, where the CIA put together this paramilitary force. And there are some incredible stories in there, just some brief ones, There was, and I'll mention this quickly. There was an anecdotal thing, which probably is not, that there was an attempt to basically call it back, and there was a couple of CIA guys leading all these, Cubans that were young and trained. Many of them former military. Some of them, as we all know, later got employed, by Richard Nixon, and so forth. But they said, let's stop this thing, and these guys said, if I turn these ships around, to see if we're not going to invade the Bay of Pigs, we're going to have bloodshed. We're going to have bloodshed, and the rest was kind of history. The famous air cover never came, and then it was a bloodbath. Yeah, and again, I'm not here to judge. To be honest, it was, but between us, and then again, I said we don't talk. I don't want to talk about any politics, but if you talk to any old Cuban, right? I heard it several times. They would mention Kennedy. And the poor guy, the next words out of people's mouths were, que pendejo. You know what I mean? That was always, for some reason, Esa Kennedy, que pendejo. And again, it wasn't fair. I don't know what the guy was going through, and maybe he should have sent the air cover, whatever.
And so that's why I said history. I mean, it's during that same time, you and I are born about the same time. My dad was military. We were growing up in Iran. Wow. And 3 years there during the days of the Shah. And it's just so different then, it's fun though, being kind of a part of history and coming from Cuba, and going to New Jersey. Talk about having an accent. How do you have a Cuban New Jersey accent?
I don't know. I was actually, one of the things that was interesting, I was going to say, kind of like Steve did, I ended up learning Spanish and English simultaneously. People ask, well, what'd you learn first? I don't distinctly remember. I do remember being around 3 or 4. It's interesting. I always tell my wife, I don't remember stuff from last week, but there's little things that I remember going to my first class in Union City and hearing myself having to talk in English, being terrified. And I was like in kindergarten or first grade, and I had this like accent. I could hear it in my ear, like, what the hell is that? Buenas tardes, yo quiero,
You sound like Murph now. Buenas tardes there, you
buenas
people.
Tardes, yeah.
Y'all,
so, teacher, I don't speak English, my teacher. And I was like terrified. But I just remember speaking both languages, like a lot of us probably did. Cartoons was a big teacher at the time before tablets.
I kind of see. So what I started out with was redneck, then hillbilly, then Spanish. So you add all that together, you get what you get.
Yeah.
Well, so growing up, so where did you do most of your formative years, as they say, as a youth? Were you in New Jersey? How long were you there?
No, man. No, we end up settling in Miami when I'm around 4, and that's it. It's 90 miles from the homeland, and like we still joke about it. We were told for years, we're going back next Christmas. We'll be back because this ain't going to happen. And I look, it was said, I'll say this to you now. I distinctly remember this, and I feel it's important to say, hearing this all the time. They would use the word around the table, gringos, but it was always affectionately. We were told, hey, whenever you're out there, whatever you're doing, do whatever the gringo does. Aprende de esta gente. Learn from these people. These are good people. And it was always this, there was never you'd get smacked in the head if you would have ever said anything negative. And it was truly, and I'm not, again, making any kind of statement toward others, but there was a tremendous appreciation for this country and all I had met. And of course, there were all the oddities, like, in South Florida, it was not uncommon for kids to be without shoes. It's summertime, you're out in the grass. What the hell? I ended up doing it. But the first time my grandparents saw like gringos without shoes, they're saying they were like, it was like aliens. And we were like, we want to be out in the yard without shoes, and puddles. Which is, hey, let's be honest. Today, if the kids tried to do that today, imagine our grandkids with puddles. Our kids would tell us we're nuts if we said, "Why don't you let them run in puddles barefooted like we did?"
What?
That's the whole thing, man. We survived. Our generation
Yeah.
survived the Hot Wheels, and bikes with no shock, no helmets or anything. I mean, my God, no bubble wrap.
We used to ride around when I was in Tennessee. We used to ride around the mosquito trucks at nighttime on our bikes in that cloud of mist coming out. Wait a minute,
that starts to explain a lot, Murph. long-term brain damage. That could be one of the effects.
What do you mean?
What? Hey, so growing up in Miami, so I take it then you stayed there through high school in Miami?
Yeah, went to high school. I went to parochial school with the nuns, and I did get smacked around every so often. It was what happened at that time. The Archdiocese of Miami, for whatever reason, had a very robust sort of educational setup. So while a lot of parishes, have schools, it was a lot more commonplace. I would say there were no less than like 15 or 18 like K through 8 grades, let's say. So I went to the one in my neighborhood, Blessed Trinity, and there were nuns. A lot of nuns were teachers, and I grew up in a kind of very it was truly bicultural, we were always kind of complaining when we would do Thanksgiving, for example. We would say, we can have the turkey, but why are we having the black beans and rice? Why are we not having the other stuff? And then our parents, my grandfather seriously would give you this look of like, listen, we'll play along with this turkey thing, but the black beans and rice stay, kid, and don't even mention it again, with a look of like, I will smack you if you ever say we're not going to have a. So yeah, for years, we're like, where's the mashed potatoes? Where are the greens? We're like, shit, no, you're getting black beans and rice. And I'll be honest, man, who the hell doesn't like black beans, rice, and plantains? Plantains, right?
Absolutely. And put some yucca in there with it, man. You got a meal right there.
So no, but listen, in retrospect, like I said, there was a lot of hardships on the elders. Truth be told, you didn't realize it as a kid, but they adapted. And I really do think, and again, this is just an opinion, but it was embracing, the American culture. And I try to think back how hard that must have been to be proud of who you are, but embrace the people that are giving you an opportunity. And I'll tell you another thing is you were told at the table is because that was another thing is everybody sat at the table, and it was, don't embarrass us in front of the gringos. I don't want to hear that something went wrong. And again, I'll repeat it. Gringos was meant affectionately. Okay, it was.
I really use gringos, and I don't use it as a derogatory term. It's just
sometimes I like to clarify because I think some people might use it.
Well, I mean, with Murph, it was more like the gringo is local. People get that. Yeah,
it still is. So don't piss him off.
Still is. It's that now. The mosquito, following the mosquito truck. It's starting to all come together now. So, what was the expectation like after high school and stuff? Because probably not the same kind of opportunities in Cuba that you had in Miami. So,
right.
What kind of expectations did your parent have for you growing up? And brothers, sisters, what'd you have?
Yeah, I was the eldest, and I had a younger brother and sister. And I'll tell you again, there were probably a lot of hardships, but I had about as normal as an upbringing as there can be. Truly bicultural. And then I go to the University of Miami, and I get a degree in finance.
Well, wait a minute. You went to You went to Miami.
I am a hurricane.
There you go, man.
Here I am.
He's got the emblem.
There it is. There it is.
This is the emblem I give Morgan, but I can imagine.
Being a Notre Dame guy, I remember. I remember the great series Catholics versus Convicts.
Yeah, listen, that wasn't great theater, man.
That was great theater.
That was great theater, man. That was great stuff.
Well, the old joke was, why can't Miami play in a bowl game? Because they can't fit their prison numbers on the back of the uniform.
Have you seen those things? He's a local Miami kid, Billy Corbin. He's done a couple of these like 30 for 30s for ESPN on that whole thing.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of those. Yeah.
Listen, if you're a Notre Dame fan, you got to look those. Those are awesome.
Well, and let me tell you that rivalry was like it was probably, I don't want to say one of the nastiest, but it was close to one of the
It
nastiest
it it
rivalries. It
was.
got to be it not in keeping with the way college football ought to be. But so all right, so you were a wayward youth. You went to the U, but how the hell did you end up in finance and baking and stuff? I mean, what possessed you to go that route?
Well, again, my father being a very practical guy. Look, unlike kids today, I was lucky that I just got into college. I had, truth be told, had no idea what I wanted to study, and my dad said, "You should get a degree in business, just something in business. Don't come back here and become a history major or something like that."
Underwater basket weaving, with a minor
Hey,
in,
so I just get a degree in finance, not because I'm that bright, I thought, but I thought this is practical, and in fact, truth is, I enjoyed it. And there was an interesting part in the in between. Is I mentioned to my mom at one point that I thought I wanted to actually join the Navy, and that was true. I'd gotten the paperwork and all that, and she said, "You're not joining the Navy till after college." She actually outright refused to let me. And then, of course, back then I probably still terrified to say no. So I get my degree in finance, and then back then, what was happening is Miami is growing from a financial perspective exponentially. We all know there was a fair amount of funny money and all of that, but the reality is there was a ton of legitimate money from South America. More than anything, just they were fleeing insecurity. A lot of these countries were expropriating monies of wealthy people. There were still, between some of the former communist governments that were down there, or even some dictatorships that were still in Brazil and in Chile and Argentina. So, if you were a local South American, you parked your money in South Florida. So the world ends up coming to bank in South Florida. And of course, the funny money gets mixed in there, but it was a lot of legitimate money. So banks are popping up everywhere. And I get a job at one.
Let's
Yeah.
stop there for a second, ask you a
Sure.
quick question. So going up through college, I mean, we're starting to get into the heyday of the cocaine wars, the trade and everything going on. Did you have any exposure to it at that time? Did any of that come across while you were in college? Seeing any of the quote gangsters or anything like that?
Absolutely, and to give it a perspective, and again, there's probably people like even my kids who are not that young, but imagine they're thinking what I'm talking about is something during like the Eisenhower administration, but it's not, man. I'm talking like 1980, 81, 82, 83, and you would go, and being a local kid, you'd go to like a club somewhere or to a bar, and you saw those types of scenes of like an entourage. These, Tony Montana guys, like you mentioned, they existed. They would roll in there, and they'd have these big beefy bodyguards, and they'd have a champagne table. And of course, my friends and I were there milking the $2 bottle of draft or whatever, and you would see these guys. So they were around, no doubt, but the whole explosion didn't happen. But there were two game changers, and later I can tell you is the Mariel boat lift in 1980-81 creates this thing. And I will tell you, I went as a volunteer. I was a kid. My parents said, "Hey, they need someone that can speak Spanish and English." So I go down to the Keys where they have this like processing center, and I spent like a couple of days there. Again, I'm all of like 20 years old as these people are being brought off boats by customs and whatnot, and they needed people to interview them. And I'm telling you guys, I saw men there that I'd never seen before. And I remember at the end of
What do
the
you mean
day,
by that?
man, these were hard dudes. These were not like just people coming for a better life. And again, I put it in perspective. I'm 20 years old, so I'm not like a world traveler. But I go home that night and I tell my parents, "Hey, this is really strange." I'd seen guys, I told them they had like tattoos on their hands. I'd never seen tattoos on arms and shit, barely. The only people were a couple of like army guys that were in my family that had a little tattoo, but these guys had these strange things. And we've all seen it with our work. guys that had that 30-yard stare. They were like looking right through me,
These are
and
predators.
they
Well,
would
that
hunt.
was Castro's master plan. Why should he deal with all the criminals? He can package a lot of these folks up and ship them to the U.S. and make them our problem.
And there was the mixture of not only just the bad guys, there were sadly a lot of crazy guys.
The mentally ill,
yeah, very
criminals.
sad, very sad. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
Again, it goes back to that point. One of our challenges, even right now in law enforcement, is dealing with the mentally ill and the amount of time and resources it takes. But yeah, so you were down there in the Keys, man. That's cool. So
yeah, and we the big. I mean, hundreds of these guys, and it didn't seem right. And again, I'm just there trying to do my duty as a citizen. We can sit here for days, and there's a lot of good not politics, history revision, and 2020 being hindsight. Should we have handled it the way we did? Probably not. But it was what we know. Nobody would have thought that. Everybody thought it was going to be like the Cubans thought. It'll be, Tia Maria and Uncle, Pedro were going to be put on a boat, and then we'd be reunited, and all would be fine. And then they started to say, okay, you want your grandmother to come? Here you go. And they would stick these dudes in. Scary guys. Some of them were really scary. It scared me.
When you were running around Miami, did you ever frequent a place called the Hotel Mutiny?
Yeah, I did not. For two reasons. One, I couldn't.
I want to put it on the record. You should have seen the look of recognition on his face when Murph said that. The eyes go, "Oh yeah, I've heard of it."
Yeah. If I probably. So the answer is I didn't go. I knew exactly where it was. I'd go down the street to some of the other cheaper joints. One, because I couldn't afford it, to be honest. I was in college, and and it's where the big dogs were. That was ground zero for Willie Falcone, Sal Magluta, before they were who they were, the boys, as they were called. And I actually saw them a couple of times in town. I actually did. I didn't realize it at that time. At a place called Monty Trainers, I remember seeing one of those scenes, and I was with a guy who goes, "You know who that is?" And I'm like, "Who's that?" He goes, "That's Willie Falcone." And like, this was before he was really famous. And I'm like, "Well, who the hell is Willie Falcone?" And I'm just a kid, to be honest, trying to find when I'm
just racing boats.
I was just trying to have a beer, a conch fritter, and maybe a nice, gal to hang out with, and but these were guys that were in another level.
Well, the reason I asked that is the showrunner for season 1 of Narcos is a guy named Chris Brancato, who has gone on to become a pretty good producer, and he's producing a new movie called Hotel Cocaine. They're actually trying to film now, but with the writer's strike, it's causing a little bit of issues.
Oh,
but it's going to be called Hotel Cocaine, and it's based on the Hotel Mutiny.
There you go.
And one of the guy that ran it, last name is Compte. I can't remember his first name now. Roman Compte.
Yeah. So really, So around that time, I end up graduating from college. I'll say this here. This is the one thing I was always proud of. I graduated after 3 years instead of 4. So I'm all of like.
So did Murph, but that was third grade.
And I'm proud of it.
Oh, jeez.
I'm sorry, I'm on a roll this morning.
Well, I mean, you look at kids nowadays; it's taking them 5 years to get that 4-year degree.
Yeah. And you know what? It wasn't so much. It was a different time, man. I didn't have but like a couple of nickels in my pocket. And my parents, like I said, I never skipped a meal. I probably had the same shirt on a couple of days in a row. I had really long hair at the time. I was blessed with a full head of hair. I had a couple of good buddies that, they were like already kind of premature balding. And back in that era, if you remember, with mullets and stuff, I felt so bad. If you were bald, man, you were out of gas. You were out of gas because there was nothing you could do. And I had this head of hair. As ugly as I was, I had a lot of hair. So that always made up for it. There you go. Look at that. Damn. That's a good one. Steve, you can't do that. You can't do what he just did, Morgan. Damn.
When you and I were in Miami there in the late '80s working with DEA, everybody had the mullet back then, man.
Chris Feistel. We've got the pictures of Chris Feistel, man, with that hair down to the crack of his ass.
He was doing Don Johnson. He didn't do the mullet route. He did the Don Johnson thing full blown.
Yeah. Listen, I what do you call it? Knew Chris very well, and spent a lot of time with him. And I'm telling you, I'd never seen anything like that. And I'd go out with him once in a while, and it was tough, man, because I was married and shit. But god damn, it would be like flies on that dude, and
Yeah.
it was bad. Yeah, and he had that whole dude thing going, and he'd walk
Roofer
in a
boy.
place and you see like.
Yeah.
They'd all just like
Chick
start
magnet.
swarming around, and anyone like us, we just sit there stirring your drink and saying, "Geez,
I'll be a good wingman. But before we get
oh
down
god,
that far, we'll do a couple Chris stories. Let's talk about your banking. Because you know what I'm interested in. You go into this. You talk about going into the bank. You said Doral Bank.
No, it was actually called Lavoro Bank International. It was the largest Italian bank in Italy. It was the biggest Italian bank, and they had a branch in Miami. Lavoro Bank International.
So
Down on Brickell.
Brickell. So let me ask you, during this time, obviously money laundering is a huge issue. Number one, did you ever know the name or run into a guy named Kenneth Ryjock?
I don't. Doesn't ring a bell. No.
So we had him on an episode. I can't remember. It was like 11 or 12 or something like that. He was the first bulk cash money launderer. He was operating during that time out of Miami. He was going down to the islands, taking money, doing a lot of work for stuff. But the reason I ask you that is kind of get back into this. It wasn't really recognized at that point, but looking back on it now, did you see any kind of money laundering going on through the bank or attempts to do that?
The attempts were there, absolutely. And again, this is going to sound like like self-serving, but it was the truth. The bank was run by a really squared away guy, a very squared away Italian American guy, and he made it clear to everybody. And again, I repeat, I'm a young guy, and this thing was growing. We'd had a couple of customers that had come in. And you can kind of generally tell by the profile of their business that they had and what they really wanted. And we didn't do it. That being said, it was still at the time where, FinCEN didn't exist. FinCEN didn't exist, and those laws
And so
weren't
we
clear.
have
It was just starting.
I should have told you one rule we have. You got to define acronyms. So you say FinCEN, let people know what it is.
Oh, FinCEN is the Financial Intelligence
Financial Crimes Enforcement.
Financial Crimes Enforcement. Help me out here, Steve. Yeah,
Financial Enforcement.
I've only been using their databases for 20 years, and I can't remember.
See, that's the thing. And we get so addicted to acronyms. What the hell does it stand for? I don't know, but I know what it does.
I ran plenty of those queries, but
Financial Crimes Enforcement Network.
There you go. But no, there was still I forget the numbers now.
There weren't really any anti-money laundering laws either. There was no AML stuff. I mean, this was all kind of new at the time.
No doubt. So it was just starting, and I didn't get involved in it, but in fact, the way it ended up developing is that I end up being asked if I want to represent the bank at the U.S. Attorney's Office with some little financial task force that was very, very, almost non-existent. It was starting, and that's when I sort of got the bug a little bit, and from there it can. And I still kind of trying to remember what about $100 bills or something weighs about 20 something pounds. $1 million in hundreds would weigh about 20 pounds. And back then it was still, money was weighed, and it was never counted. It was weighed.
Wow. So that's interesting too. We had George Jung on.
Yeah. Oh,
Pablo's business partner and stuff. And that's, he knew, to his encyclopedic knowledge, he could tell you how many bills it would be, how much it weighed, it's just down to the ounce. Mm-hmm. Your point, there's no way to count, $5 million, $10 million, but
yep.
So that you could probably, take, a couple hundred off the top. Nobody's going to notice. But when big money starts missing, ounces mean something when it doesn't weigh exactly what it should.
Oh yeah. Somebody get killed over that.
So, well, you kind of set the stage then for how you got the bug. So how did you end up? What did this task force do to you to say, and number one, number two, don't tell me you watched Miami Vice and said, I want to be Don Johnson.
No, I didn't. No, That came later, and I'll tell you about that later. No, I didn't. What it ultimately did it for me is again, I graduate young. I'm sitting on Brickell Avenue. It's on the 17th floor. It's like marble floors. I even had a little office. And it was all these older people. People, when I say older, they were like probably in their 30s and 40s with families. And again, I had more testosterone than I had sense. So, I was just like enjoying being at the bank. But, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal. And there's a DEA agent who's retired now. His name is Tom Pasquarello.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a photo in the Wall Street Journal of like 4 or 5 banker financial types being perp walked by, a guy with one of the Ray jackets. And I will tell you, my wife has heard this. My kids heard it. I read that article and I said, that's the shit I want to do.
That's what I want to do.
And look, I was too young to picture I can make a lot of money becoming a banker. I'm bilingual, and this is a pretty cool place, and a lot of pretty muchachitas, and really cool drinking illy coffee. And no, it was. I'm not going to lie to you. It was
DEA's got marble floors all over the place in your own offices, and gold fixtures in the bathrooms, right?
Yeah, my first day reminded me of that, and Steve has heard the story a couple of times, but I'll tell you. So I put in, I literally call like 1-800-DEA, and back then, of course, come on down here and pick up the forms, and I go down and I pick up the form. I come from no background in law enforcement. I don't know anybody in law enforcement. When I mentioned this to my parents, you'd have thought like that I'd like truly just like stuck them in a closet and farted or something, because they went like this. They scrunched their face like, you want to what? I said, yeah, I think I want to join. I want to join like federal law enforcement, and I want to be an agent. An agent? They're like, what do you mean agent? You're a banker. You got a good job in the bank. It was like that. And I'm serious. They thought, no, that's not very smart. So this thing goes on for like a year and a half. And then they finally call me, and it was really kind of screwy because typical, I come to realize it. They called me on a Friday and they said, do you think you can be in Quantico next Wednesday? And I'm like, I really, really want to go. I really want to do this, but no, I can't. I can't just be there in 4 days. I owe these people a couple of weeks. Bottom line is they gave me a month, and then I was off to basic agent training.
What year?
What class number were you?
I was actually class number 55.
Yeah, so 55. I was 53. We were there at the same time.
There at the same time. There were 5 classes going on at that time. Yeah. It was a mess, remember? It was a mess. Where'd you go for your police training initially, Morgan? Where'd you go?
I was state of Kansas, so I went through what we called Yoder U.
Yoder? What's Yoder?
The little town called Yoder outside Hutchinson, Kansas, which is the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. So my first academy was 1982 is when I went through my first academy. Then I went through the State Patrol Academy, which was 5 times longer than the first time I went through was only 5 weeks long. But the reason we called it Yoder U, a little town called Yoder, the Mennonites, an offshoot of the Amish, they cooked our food. One of the few places when I went through the military and basic training, you lost weight. There you gained weight because of the way they fed you. It was like, oh my God, this food's so good,
Nice. Yeah, you can't say that about the DEA Academy.
Have you been to Quantico, Morgan? You've been there? Well, we used to call it baked lunga fish. That Lunga Lake that was back there. Yeah. Man, that thing was nasty. That was the food wasn't bad. I liked. My wife says you still like that. I like institutionalized living. I won't lie to you. Even now, late in life, now I like program bland food.
I had several friends go through the FBI National Academy, and even the FBI agent. But they were state and local guys. But the Yellow Brick Road, everybody talked about. Run the Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah, that was fun.
So, but hey, question for you: while you're in the academy, you seem like a guy that might have had to write a couple memos. Did you for any infractions that you may have committed?
Actually, I had one, and I really thought it was going to be over. And if you've been to the FBI Academy, you remember those like glass like walkways that they have around?
Call them the gerbil trails.
The gerbil trails, right? Yeah. Right. My roommate at the time, who was a great guy. It's funny. His dad was an FBI agent. his cousin was an FBI agent, and I think it was his uncle or something had been an FBI agent. And he decides he's going to be a DEA agent. Truth be told, great. Yeah, apparently he said, the hell with this. Bottom line is just to digress. About 8 years after DEA, he was the DEA, great kid. And he ends up going to the Bureau. No surprise. I guess he figured I'd screwed with my family enough. Let me go over there. But he's a little guy. And you know what he was? This is a true story. He was on the U.S. Olympic team in badminton. That poor guy took abuse, because you can imagine. This is a true story, though. So he was like, man, I wish they would let me out of here because I got to go to training in California for like 3 weeks. And I, of course, was my roommate, nice guy. And I go, what is it you do? He goes, badminton. And I, of course, I didn't even know it's an Olympic sport, and the guy was about as fit as hell. But he's a little guy, very fit. So we're goofing off, and he's on my back, and it's a Sunday, typical, the only calm time, Sunday around 8:00 at night. We're heading back to the dorms. We'd had dinner or whatever, and we're goofing off, and he goes flying off my back. He slams into one of those glass plates. And seriously, somehow he doesn't get hurt, but the glass plate like falls off and cracks. So now we're standing there.
You talking about in the gerbil trail there?
Yes. This is a true story.
That's when you go
like, wait a minute, hold on. Look, hold on. We're going to have to, we have to do a little bit more inquiry in this. He just didn't fall off. I have a feeling he got thrown off. You just don't, quote, fall off and hit one of those things. Come on now.
Again, you're probably a little loopy by then. You haven't seen your wife or your loved ones, and you're hanging around with these guys. It's Sunday. We're a better part of like 8-9 weeks. It was whatever. Yeah, and we're wrestling. He's on my back, and I'm like throwing him around, and he just flies off my back. No, we're wrestling. So he slams into it, and it collapses. It just falls off and hits the ground and cracks.
But that's when you run.
Run where? To Lake Lunga? Lunga Lake? And yeah.
They didn't have cameras on the hallways back then.
Did he go flying out with a glass?
No. He kind of stayed there, kind of hung, and thank God, because he might have got hurt. So you could hear now a pin drop. And then, you talk about running, all the other people around us, it was he and I standing there by ourselves. So a few moments later, our counselor comes, a DA guy comes up, and I still, to this day, I saw him over the years. I can never thank him enough to say, hey, he wrote it up. He wrote it up. It's an accident. And it appeared that glass was loose, and somebody tripped, and we survived it. So that was
only through creative report writing, right?
It was. It really was.
That's what DEA is all about. Creative report writing.
Yeah. So we survived that, but that was about the only kind of interesting story.
So I was going to say, so when you start put it in your preferences, was Miami at your top, or was it just like pretty clear you're going to go to Miami?
No, it's interesting that you said that, because they've since stopped doing it this way. Maybe it was for you, Steve. What they would do, man, and is they would, first of all, that was always the stress for all 35 of us. Where are people going to go? And we knew that because they told us, some of you are going to go to New York, some of you are going to go to San Francisco, and some of you are going to go to the border. It's going to be that way. And then, of course, a lot of guys were terrified. So they would do this ceremony. We'd go to Lunga Lake on the bleachers, and there were envelopes. And they would call you up one by one in front of everybody. And then the class coordinator would hand you your envelope, and they would say, Morgan, the envelope. And you would see guys literally sweating the tension, and they'd open the damn thing. And that's when you knew where you're going, knowing within seconds, you're going to have to probably call your wife, yourself, whatever, and say, we're going to San Francisco, we're going to New York, we're going to El Paso, which El Paso would have been, in retrospect, a good one. There was Del Rio. There were some tough places. And two guys cried. I'm not going to lie to you. When I say cried, their eyes welled up. Fuck yeah.
Really?
You didn't have, oh, hell yeah. One guy, Brian, I won't say his last name, Brian, and his eyes welled up because his wife wasn't going to go with him. And he ended up getting, I think, San Francisco.
Damn. So, well, I'd probably cry if I was going to San Francisco.
Now they tell you before they hire you where you're going.
Yeah.
And then you decide whether you want it.
That's the
But you only had 35 guys in your class? Is that what you started with?
We started with 35 and ended up with 33. We lost just a gal and a guy.
Really?
A gal and a guy. We lost
Like
them.
50, huh?
And yeah. Why, you lost more?
No, but the classes are supposed to be 50. Yeah,
No,
you're
we
supposed
had
to start with 50.
35. But you asked Morgan, out of the 33, only 3 people went back home, and I was one. And I think that they just said, look, calm or actually smarts played in. Somebody said, look, dude, this is a Cuban guy. We're having all these issues in South Florida. He's from Miami. He speaks Spanish. Let's not get cute and send him to Kansas City. Send his ass back home. So I did. I got to go back home. But I saw a lot of guys that didn't. GS7s, struggling in bad places.
You remember when we got to Miami? I got there in November '87, which is probably you may have already gotten back by then.
Yeah.
How many Cubans or how many Spanish-speaking agents did we have in Miami?
Just a couple, and it was Grumpy Omar who was in training. Yeah, remember he was Grumpy Omar.
Oh yeah.
And there was that other old guy. I don't remember his name now. He was even grumpier. Yeah, he was. No one. What was that guy's name? But that was it. And man,
you're right, man. He was bitchy all the time.
Yeah,
he didn't want to talk to a gringo.
Yeah. So,
well, so let's get into this a little bit then. So you get out. What kind of stuff do they have you doing? You come back down to Miami. So, because we're going to talk about a couple cases you brought up. We're going to talk about the heroin smuggling, and then we're going to talk about you have a smuggling case that kind of overlapped with Murph, with Pablo and Colombia and guys like that. But when you first started getting out, what was it like for you coming back as a DEA agent? You saw them on the Wall Street Journal article. You go, that's me. I want to be that. That's the shit. And now you're the shit.
I got through it all. It's my wife was pregnant with my daughter at the time when I was at Quantico. And again, I had a few friends, including, some family members said, good for you. Let's see here. You were working at a bank in an office where you were making at that time was like back then it was like $38,000, which would have probably been the equivalent of like $110,000 today for just some kid. And then I took a job with this government agency where they're going to, pimp you out and see if somebody shoots you in the head, and you're making $17,000 and you get to work 14 hours a day. That's smart. So you're working your way down the ladder of success. Muy bien.
Don't forget, you get the 25% AUO.
Sure. Oh yeah, that and about 3 cents would have gotten me. So we literally came close to skipping meals and I don't mind. You know what? My wife you manned up, and it made us better people for that. We lived in a small house, and listen, all bullshit aside, if it wasn't the fact that I went back to my parents and grandparents, wasn't there. But my learning curve was very acute, guys, because what Steve had mentioned. Here you now get back to a guy who speaks Spanish, is a Cuban, and knows the streets and understands the culture. Remember, we would move people to places, very bright people, all of us, but if you don't know the culture, man, it's hard. And so I end up getting, used quite a bit, but I was all amenable to it. By my first day on the job, I told you it was
What do you mean what'd you do on your first day on the job? Come on.
I show up, and the SAC, I don't know what that is. So I get into the elevator, and they said, you got to go up there and get sworn in. I'm telling you, man, I was beaming. I felt. So I go up there. I had my creds. I had my gun, in the holster. And it's this guy called Diogenes Galanos, about as laid back a guy. Dodge Galanos. He was before Tom Cash. So I go in there, and he says, welcome aboard, and sit down, and I swear my oath to the Constitution and to the flag, and I'm ready to go. So he goes, I just need to let you know. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, you're going to the asset forfeiture group. Now, that didn't mean anything to me at the time. So I'm like, okay. And he goes, and he's looking at a piece of paper, and he goes, I see here you are a banker. I see here you have a degree in finance. As you know, young man, we have a big need for this kind of skill set. So I think it's best that you go to the asset forfeiture group. I, of course, okay, I don't know anything. They tell me, go to the second floor, go down the hall, and there's a lady there. Go talk to her. Like Jimmy Soilis would say, hand to God. I stand in front of her with my Giorgio, Brutini shoes. I got seriously, a little leather briefcase that's got my initials on it, like gold-plated little initials. And I got like I think it was like a $26 silk tie. And I'm standing in front of her, and she looks up. She's like looking at her desk, and she was going to say, "Who the fuck are you?" But she goes, "Who are you?" She was, and I go, I'm the new agent. My name's Alex Dominguez. I'm assigned here to the asset first. She goes, new agent? And she then makes a beeline into the boss's office, closes the door. I can hear her saying, who the hell is this guy? We got no room. We got nowhere to put this guy. What the hell? We got already a lot, blah, blah, blah. And I can hear her. So she comes out. This is, again, truth. She says, listen, there's a desk out in the hallway. Push that damn thing in here and just put it right there in the corner till we can figure out where you're going to be. Just so you understand, don't bother me unless it's important shit. Timesheets are due every other Friday. Make sure they're in, and don't tell me that you didn't get paid because you were too damn lazy to get it in. Now go. Just go. She goes like, just go. So I'm like, pushing this like 600-pound steel case desk through a door. And then I can see a couple of the guys back there between laughing and like the fast version is later on guys did put their arm around me, but there were some weird ass people in that group because that's where, look, there was and again, it's been a long time. Nobody will ever know, but only people that were with her. She was a female agent married to this other male agent. And this girl, I'm telling you, I looked at her. She must be like 11 months pregnant. She's like wobbling around in there. And all she did was like eat and didn't do shit. And then there was this older lady that had stacks of like files. And this other agent says, this lady's been here for about 42 years. She had been on the job 42 years. Remember, I'm all of like 25 or whatever. So look, to show, that's not where I wanted to be. These were like where a lot of the guys that were either retiring or were hurt or just a little bit of market.
Yeah. Put out the pasture, retired on active duty. Road.
Well, it's almost like a geriatric narc squad.
Oh God, yeah. But again, there were a couple of nice guys. There was a guy. His name is Kenny. So Kenny was this single older guy, very very odd guy, but very nice guy. And I remember when I'd been there for like a month. He had gone away and came back like 2 weeks later. And Kenny, where'd you go? And he goes, I went to Thailand. He goes, oh, yeah, that's cool. You went to Thailand? Went on vacation? He goes, yeah. Who'd you go with? No, just by myself.
Oh, I can see where this is headed.
Yeah. And he was like, yeah. He goes, and where'd you stay? He goes, oh, I stayed in this like little bungalow a little bit outside of, like Phuket or something. And you could see like I don't want to say their last names, the agent, Mike G. Hell, he was Mike Garland.
Yeah, yeah.
Great guy. He was the one that helped me get through this, because if not, I'd have been real sad. And And he sat there and he's given me this thing like behind Kenny's.
So for everybody knows, he's giving him the crazy sign, the finger around the ear.
Yeah. So Mike Garland, what he does is
Mike
every
is
day.
a sharp dude too.
Yes. So what he does to me every day at around like 4:00, people are heading for the exits in this forfeiture group. He starts calling the groups around, in DEA there in Miami, which there was no shortage of this issue. Is, hey, listen, I got this poor kid in the asset forfeiture group. He's been doing like, forfeiture affidavits all day. You might want to just take him out on the street. He just wants to go out on the street, and he speaks Spanish. So, that was like the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. That spread like wildfire. We put this kid's ass in the. I spent more afternoons in that hot van with a Kel, and I would go out every night and covered meetings and got to get on the street, and that's how the sort of the whole thing starts.
Well, let's roll back. We want to get into your first story, but who did you piss off to get put in the asset forfeiture unit?
Well, I think they were complaining that they didn't have enough people that knew what they were doing. And again, the truth is there were a lot of financial investigations. Remember, we were all still pretty green at this. There was not a lot of true experience. So I was called, and I was always referred to like two words: kid or pencil head. Hey, this guy's a pencil head, and I would wonder, why am I being called a pencil head? Because I had a degree in finance and worked at a bank, and they'd say he's a pencil head because I wasn't former military and I wasn't former, law enforcement. So
how tall are you, Alex?
I'm a 6'3". 6'3".
Yeah. You're a big man.
Yeah. Well, oh man,
I don't know that I'd be calling you.
But listen, but and I'll share a quick thing is on one of those first meetings. I don't want to say his last name, doesn't matter. Nice man, his name is Jack, and they bring me into the group and they say, "This is Jack, who's a gringo, but he grew up on the border and spoke perfect Spanish, but that border Spanish." So they said, "Hey, this is Jack. He's going to be UC today. I need you to, if you don't mind, cover the meeting so you can listen to the conversation, record it, let us know how things are going." And I just remember being struck by seeing this man that didn't look well. And like for his age, I guess, or what he was, his eyes were sunken. And he ends up, sadly, I come to find out, not more than I think 5 years later, he retires like 2 or 3 years after this, and he passes away, from complications from drinking. And look, you guys know what shocked me amongst not a lot of things was the amount of old guys that really did not take care of themselves. They would smoke and drink. When I come on the job, I don't know, Steve, for like the first 5 months, you could still smoke in office. Those little metal tins were everywhere. And you see these old guys, they sit there smoking and drinking.
You remember back then, every 6 months, we had to do the mandatory PT test?
Yep. Some guys were told just to walk.
Yeah, the old guys would walk and smoke cigarettes.
Right.
Us young studs were running, trying to get time.
Yeah, trying to see.
That reminds me, if there's a famous picture out there, you talk about things being done differently. The very first Super Bowl, Len Dawson, the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, sitting on the sideline, got a Fresca, I think, in one hand and a cigarette. Or no, I don't know if it's a Fresca or a beer, but something in one hand and a cigarette in the other. This is, during the game.
And of course, everybody. Now you're not allowed to show it. Mickey Mantle and those guys in the locker room, with a cigarette and a beer or a cigarette and a cocktail with their uniforms on.
Hey players, that is the end of part 1. Part 2 comes out, as always, on Tuesday. In the meantime, go check us out at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. Also, go check out our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com. We've got a lot more information there, including our book list. Any book written by our guests will be listed there. In the meantime, go check us out also, patreon.com/gameofcrimes. It's where we put a lot more content you won't hear on our regular podcast. We go into a lot more topics, and folks, it is a lot of fun. So go check us out, patreon.com/gameofcrimes. In the meantime, everybody stay safe. We'll see you tomorrow for part 2.